Hello and welcome to the Friday, January 29th, 2021 edition of On Iowa Politics. This week, committees, everybody's got committees, the Reynolds Express, and ranking the candidates. Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And with me today are Amie Rivers of the Waterloo-Cedar Courier. Good morning, Amie.
Good morning, James.
And Gazette opinion editor Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
You can find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to On Iowa Politics wherever you find your podcast. First up, Budget Hawk. Amie, freshman Representative Ashley Hinson told you this week that she wants to be a budget hawk, looking at the congressional spending spree even before the coronavirus pandemic. It appears that's a pretty small flock of members of Congress. We talked last week about her assignment to the Appropriations Committee. This week she scored another A-list assignment. How does a freshman from the minority party get so lucky?
Well, I was wondering that too. I mean, so the background is she had said that she wanted to be on budget and transportation. And side note, she also got named to a transportation subcommittee yesterday, so she's getting all her wishes coming true. I think the reason for that, I talked to Chris Larimer over at UNI. He's a political professor over there, and he thinks that these high profile committee assignments are very significant. It basically immediately raises her profile. She can use that on the campaign trail. She can use that to fundraise. Apparently there are, donors that are attracted to people that are in these committees. And on the heels of her already, stellar fundraising in the first district, she can use that to really build a war chest basically for the next 2 years, which is going to be significant. She's probably going to have a pretty good Democratic challenger in the general election in 2 years. This is a swing district. So I think it's really important for her to sort of hit the ground running in fundraising, just like it'll be really important for the Democrats to do that. But yeah, these committees are really significant. She and Feenstra were actually named to budget. So they have an opportunity to sort of, be two Iowans on that committee, which has, the last Iowan you might remember on the committee is Jim Nussel, for example, who was on a longtime member of the committee. And of course, Grassley is a member on the Senate side. So, being on these committees can be really powerful. And as a freshman, it really shows, I think, that the party is investing in her.
Yeah, we joke sometimes about, bringing home the bacon, but when you think about Hinson on appropriations and budget, Feenstra on budget, what does this mean for Iowa?
Yeah, well, she says it means, she's going to be a hawk for taxpayers, AKA she's going to, try to rein in spending wherever she can. And of course, she is on appropriations as well as budget, as you mentioned. So she has, discretionary and mandatory spending sort of at her disposal. She's able to sort of look at all of these numbers as they're coming in and, is really able to sort of have those conversations with her constituents from a position of, knowing about this in advance before they get the bills on the floor. So I think that she can, definitely insert what she believes to be Iowa values, Iowa taxpayer values into these processes.
So for Hinson, it's not just a matter of bringing home the bacon, but saving the taxpayers' bacon.
Definitely. Giving the bacon back to the taxpayers, I would think she would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Second District Representative Marinette Miller-Meeks was assigned to the Homeland Security Committee, which has legislative jurisdiction over the National Strategic Stockpile, which, if maintained properly, might be valuable when we face the next pandemic. She also said her appointment to the Veterans Affairs Committee and Education and Labor put her in a position to help the University of Iowa Hospital Clinics and Iowa City Veterans Hospital. And as you mentioned, Randy Feenstra landed a spot on the Budget Committee as well as the Ag Committee, where Representative Cindy Axne serves. So, Todd, I guess Iowa has its bases covered.
Yeah, those are all the Agriculture Committee is traditionally one that you want Iowa representation on. We've got 2 members, so that's good. They are spread around a lot of topic areas that are of interest to Iowans. So those are all good assignments.
There is some talk that the House might bring earmarks back, but without earmarks, how much should we expect from 3 freshman members of Congress and a second termer?
Well, yeah, I mean, the minority members are going to have, an uphill time making a mark on on some of the larger bills, but they're going to they're going to have input on measures that could affect Iowa. They're going to be in the room when they're discussed and debated, so that's an advantage. I mean, I would expect for Henson on budget and appropriations. I don't know how much bacon she's going to bring home or protect, but I'm expecting a lot of press releases on, I can't believe the federal government is spending money on this, $1 million to study bear mating and stuff like that. I expect Henson will be churning out a lot of that during the
Like
next few
Ernst has
years.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as Ernst has done, just
Mhm.
basically pointing out what sound like absurd uh, expenditures. So yeah, I think that's when she talks about transparency. I think that's probably what she's talking about. Is she's going to show us all the crazy stuff.
Yeah, you're right. We should put this in context. They are in the minority party in both the House and the Senate. So the Democrats do have more members on these committees and will be more likely to be able to push their agenda through.
Yeah, so their primary mission is to uh, help the Republicans get back in the majority. So
Mhm.
they're sort of more going to be more in a political campaign mode, maybe than a legislating mode, with hopes that if they get the majority back, then they can actually start doing some work.
Todd, Hinson seems to be following in the footsteps or the tradition of her predecessors from Eastern Iowa, H.R. Gross, Chuck Grassley, Jim Nussel, as Amie mentioned, and Rod Blum. All were fiscal conservatives, were budget hawks, and that seems successful for everyone but Rod Blum.
Right.
Are voters less interested in balancing the budget and reining in spending today than they were 20, 40, 50 years ago?
Yeah, well, I know Republicans were a lot less interested in it during the Trump years because the deficit exploded, and
Because Trump wasn't interested in it.
yeah, he wasn't interested
Yeah.
in it at all. Uh, so the Hawk, now that there's a Democratic president, the Hawks are back. They've made a comeback. They were cryogenically frozen and they've been thawed. So, uh, but right now, as far as the American people, I think with the pandemic and the hopes for more pandemic assistance, maybe another round of checks, I think folks
Yeah.
are probably more interested in that right now than whether the budget's balanced. That
Yeah.
may
And
change over time, but yeah, I think right now they want spending.
Hinton mentioned that too. And I asked her about, coronavirus spending. Like, okay, yes, you want to rein in spending, but what about the ongoing pandemic? What about, the economic recession? And she said, my number one job is to get them the relief they need, but I think it's important we're cognizant of spending on the bottom line. So I think she and the other Republicans are sort of saying, yeah, we are going to, push something through.
Yeah, they're talking about targeted relief. I think that the sticking point will be what else is in that package. Things like the $15 an hour minimum wage and those sorts of things that they're going to see as poison pills to passing that. Um, and they just want it focused on COVID relief, PPP, and those sorts of things. So, yeah, all that bipartisan stuff will probably disappear quickly.
It already has on Twitter.
Well, there you go. It never was there on Twitter, was it?
Like January 6th for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. If you look quickly.
Yep.
Speaking of bipartisanship, those whistles you heard this week were the sound of the Iowa Republican Railroad running through the State House. The majority party passed resolutions calling for a gun rights amendment to the state constitution and another that would declare there's no right to an abortion in the Constitution. They also worked late on a Thursday evening to pass back to school plan that Governor Reynolds will sign this morning, Friday morning. If she signs it, which she announced just before we began recording this,
This just
school, yeah, this just in, schools would have to offer 100% in-person instruction for students whose parents choose that option beginning as early as February 15th. Todd, would it be fair to say that the Reynolds Express is gathering steam for re-election?
Well, I mean, yeah, you look around the state, it's as red a Nebraska football Saturday. So
Yeah.
I'd like
Oh,
to,
that was nice.
I'd like to, she's got to be pretty heavily favored to run for reelection
Hmm.
or to win reelection, unless, I mean, there are lots of folks that are unhappy with the way she's handled the pandemic and many things, but there was no sign in the 2020 election that uh, that Republicans were being held in any way accountable for any of that stuff. So
Mm.
yeah, I think she she thinks that it's interesting that the school choice bill in particular has sort of been on the table for a long time, and now it's on the fast track. I guess the enlarged majorities probably have something to do with that. Maybe there weren't quite the votes before. I mean, and yesterday it only passed with 26 votes in the Senate.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's not exactly a slam dunk, and I don't know that it doesn't sound like the House is going to be rushing to pass it right away, which may mean that there's some some convincing yet to be done. But uh, yeah, I mean, her agenda is getting passed. Unlike last year when she had the big Invest in Iowa package that got sidetracked by the pandemic. But yeah, she's checking off boxes fast, and that's always good news for a governor.
Yeah. Um, you know, Jeff Kaufman, the chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa, recently talked about how the party has never been stronger. With the governor, two U.S. senators, three members of Congress,
Yeah.
majorities in the state house. Um, so, I mean, your description of how red Iowa is absolutely spot on. But and so, Amy, I guess considering the success Republicans enjoyed in 2020. Do you think Reynolds is just trying to recreate that magic in 2022 by appealing to the same base, these Trump Republicans?
Could be. I think that, I would imagine she's playing it safe. I think it'd be a mistake to directly appeal to only Trump Republicans, since it's not entirely clear that the state is full of them. Obviously, they didn't vote him in the primary; they voted him in the general election, and again in the general election. But I think Iowa's a little more moderate, than some other places might be, and I think that she'd be good to not necessarily, jump full on the Trump train. I think if she wants to do that, she can point to, policies that she had in agreement with him and note how much she's gotten done. But I think, Todd's right. She can play on the strength of checking all of these boxes off that she had promised voters.
It would be interesting to see how the school choice uh, bill polls with Iowans. It would be interesting to see
Yeah.
what kind of support it has, because I have a feeling it might not have majority support. I think you know basically all of we've received lots of letters to the editor on it, and none of them have been supportive of it. I mean, maybe it's just because that the opposition is more mobilized and the supporters don't feel like they have to lift a finger because they've got the votes. But
Hmm.
uh, and
Tough to
I
tell.
on the one hand, Reynolds did not exactly win over Fred Hubble by a landslide,
Right.
but
Hmm.
on the other hand, 2020, by all historic or 2022 by all historical standards and conventional wisdom is probably going to be a good Republican year, unless of course the party splinters and there's a Patriot Party and a
Yeah.
Republican Party,
Yeah.
and
The Trump
but
party.
yeah, so I think Reynolds is probably looking at at the horizon, thinking that it's going to be a good election for Republicans, so she doesn't have a lot to worry about it. And we also don't know who's going to run against her, and if it doesn't look like a good a good landscape, she may not draw high profile opponents, but that
Mhm.
remains to be seen.
I think she
Todd,
was smart to stay on Trump's good side. He won't probably try to primary her in that case.
right,
Yeah,
right, good
yeah.
point. Todd, how much do you think her success is going to be connected to COVID? I mean, if by football season, we all have our vaccinations and we can go to games and go to the bars and do all the things that we remember doing back before COVID. Um,
Mhm.
it seems like her chances for reelection are really good. If on the other hand we have another surge, um, I mean, we're still quite a ways out from election day, November 2022, but it seems like her standing and her support has really taken a beating over the past 10 months because of COVID and the way she's handled it. Whether she's done a good job or not, she's really taken a lot of grief for it, as I guess pretty much every governor in every state has. Um, I mean, does
Yeah,
she rise and fall on COVID?
well, I think it's a lot's going to depend on the vaccine rollout. If good progress is made, and I mean, a lot of this is out of her hands, of course, because you know the the governor isn't manufacturing vaccine herself. But I mean, that's going to play a big part, because you can already feel sort of the anxiety building as people are, you know, getting impatient and
That's true.
and having a hard time sort of figuring out how to get in line and what they need to do. And I know we've got a map now that's interactive, but that's maybe not great for folks that aren't online savvy. But uh,
And
yeah,
how
I mean,
much of that do they put on her?
yeah, well, I think you know the, when you're in charge, and that's part of the you know challenge for her, is that she really has. I mean, the legislature sort of stood on the sidelines, and the governor has been really the face of this pandemic response. She's taking control of it. So if the vaccinations go well and we get past it, and I think people will feel good about it. But if we don't, they won't. And because she's the face of it, she's going to get the credit or the blame. But
Exactly.
that's, by 2022, if everything goes well and, we make our way out of it, I don't know how much people will even want to talk about it. I mean, that's the, I mean, I've been sort of reading some of the history of the 1918 pandemic. And yeah, once the pandemic was over with, people just sort of moved on and didn't want to rehash it.
That's why they were the
Yeah, well,
greatest generation, Todd.
yeah.
Yeah.
They dealt with their trauma and they moved on.
Yeah, we buried the dead and we got going.
I was just thinking, I wonder if ethanol plants can manufacture the vaccine. I mean,
Hmm.
man, if that was possible, we could crank up those plants and be inoculating people twice and three times and four times.
Yeah, well, they could also, at least convert to distilled spirits.
Yeah,
One or the other. Just give us one.
Medicinal. Yeah,
exactly.
just something to do while we wait.
Coping mechanism, right? All right. Well, speaking of elections, Amy, a Waverly City Councilman, has proposed changing city elections there to ranked choice voting. Voters could cast a ballot for more than one candidate in a city council race, but would, as the name implies, rank their choices in order of preference. What's his thinking on this?
So it's Brian Bergen is the Waverly City Councilman that brought this up in like the latter part of the meeting when they're just like chit chatting and discussing their city council comments. And he's a mathematics professor at Wartburg College, and he's actually teaching a class right now called the Mathematics of Democracy. So he's teaching voting systems. The topic of instant runoff came up, and he brought it up to the council saying, this is actually a really good idea. There are a couple places around that do this, and we should try it because it could save us money on a runoff election. So I looked into this, and so you might remember that Maine does this. Alaska also has this for some elections. New York City is going to start this for elections this year, but cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, and San Francisco already use this for municipal elections. And you've also got this around the world in places like Australia, India, Ireland. There's an organization called Fair Vote, and they advocate for this practice. They say it'll be more fair and functional of a democracy. But it hasn't been tried in Iowa. So it's actually unclear if it's legal or if they would need permission from the state to do it. There'd be other considerations. So you would save money on a runoff election, for example, which is thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how big your city is. But also, you would have to spend money on getting new machines, new ballots, obviously the new machines that can read those ballots, and then just voter education drives because now you have to explain to people exactly how this is going to work. Basically, if you don't vote for the candidate that is one of the top two and you voted for the least candidate, your second choice then gets counted, and then that's basically that instant runoff election. So it's a little bit complicated, and it'll take some time for people to really get their hands around, particularly if they're going to be the first ones in Iowa to try it. But it's really, really interesting.
It is, and what I've read about ranked choice voting is that it really can change the dynamics of campaigning because you don't necessarily want to go full on attack on your opponent because you're hoping that people will rank you 1, 2, or 3. I mean, obviously they want to be ranked 1, but you don't want to be
5, for example.
5 or 6.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So one theory is that there's less of that attacking your opponents, and you want to try and present yourself favorably to a broader range of voters, not just your base, but a broader range of voters. It does
so it
get
can eliminate
complicated.
negative campaigning then?
Well, that's the theory. I mean, that's a pretty big ask.
Yeah.
But I think it would change the dynamics of campaigning because you have to reach out to more voters. You want to be 1, 2, or 3 on every ballot. You don't want to be left out at all. And then there's the whole thing about, okay, do I tell my supporters only vote for me and don't vote for 2 and 3, or vote for the guy who is already down in like 9th or 10th in the polls, vote for that person. So it will give the campaign consulting organizations a whole new line of work, basically.
Well, that's good.
And it'll be full employment for them.
It'll be Nate Silver will.
He'll
be have fits.
Oh yeah. I mean,
I think it'll be interesting that New York City's trying it because I think that'll really raise its profile this year. So they're going to start that for their January or their June primaries, and then in the November elections, they're also going to be doing it. So I think that'll really raise its profile. You'll start seeing a lot more articles in a lot more places and think pieces, and I think people will really either come around to it or form a dislike of it, and maybe that'll answer the question for Waverly.
Well, and a lot of cities that have the runoff elections for their mayor and city council have been changing their how they handle that. I think Cedar Rapids has done away with the runoff elections, haven't they, Todd?
No, they still have them.
Still have them. Okay, I thought they
still have it. They still have the December runoff.
Yeah, which to me is it always is confusing, and I think it's confusing for voters too. You go, you have this big campaign, you go vote, and then it's like, oh yeah, you got to come back in a month,
and those are historically lower attended.
Oh yeah, a lot lower.
And they are a big expense for cities that they can't necessarily budget for.
Right, yeah. As Amie mentioned, Maine has been out front in the use of ranked choice voting, and a number of cities around the country are doing this. But Todd, I'm wondering, looking ahead to the 2024 presidential election, sorry to make you do that, what impact might ranked choice voting have if or as the Republican Party splinters?
Yeah. So does Maine actually do ranked choice voting on like federal offices? The whole?
I believe so. So. Yeah.
Well, by 2024, I'm not sure how many states will have adopted this. I mean, Iowa is not exactly the most pro-change state sometimes. I mean, embracing innovation. I mean, I live in a town where people are still upset about roundabouts. So ranked choice voting, I don't know what that would do. But yeah, conceivably, I mean, if you've got, if the Republican Party fractures into multiple parties, then I don't know. I mean, ranked choice could have an impact because if you wanted to vote for, the Republican nominee first choice and the Patriot Party nominee second choice, I mean, that would be, right, I suppose, significant.
Yeah, it does have implications for the lower political parties. So even on the other side, on the Democratic side, you could start seeing a Green Party polling better. You could see, on the Republican side, a Libertarian Party, a possible Trump Patriot Party, right? So it definitely has implications.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if other states take it on, especially red states. I mean, what are the Nebraskas and Iowas and Missouris and all those going to think about that?
Well,
I would anticipate at some point it may become, an election reform that people embrace, but it's
Mhm.
well,
it's still
yeah,
a
we're
little new for a lot of folks.
definitely years and years away from that on the federal level, and like for presidential races. But I think I wouldn't be surprised to see it, more cities go this route for the reasons that they're talking about in Waverly to save money. It might. I would be interested too if on the local level it would increase participation. That uh, people would be willing to run. If I mean, even in some of the bigger cities in Iowa, at least, we're seeing when people run for city council, they're, pretty soon they're like, well, that guy's a Republican or she's a Democrat or that sort of thing. And so even though it's
Mhm.
nonpartisan, it does become partisan.
Mhm.
With ranked choice, there might be less of that. I don't know. You know,
Well, and then
anything to increase participation would be good, I think.
I
yeah,
think you're
well,
right because some people will, oh, I'm not going to vote because, they're just going to win anyway. If you get the chance to vote for your niche candidate as a number one and then put your second choice as a number two, and then that number two ends up winning, you still feel like your vote counted, right? You still feel like you still voted your conscience.
yeah, and you could do ranked choice voting in a bill, and also include like doing the electoral college to apportion it by congressional district. So
Yeah. Yeah. There are two
That too.
states that do that, Maine and Nebraska.
Nebraska,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Republicans would like to do that in California, and I think
Hmm.
Democrats would like to do that in some red states. And
Sure.
I don't know. I haven't studied it. I don't know how the parties which party would gain advantage, but that's being talked about.
Hmm. Mhm.
Well, when ranked choice voting is adopted for presidential elections, we'll talk about it on a future edition of On Iowa Politics. If you're still hungry for more political conversation, join me, Todd Dorman, Aaron Jordan, and Adam Sullivan of the Gazette, along with Iowa Capital Dispatch editor Kathy Obradovich, for the January edition of Pints and Politics, which you can find under the special events tab at the bottom of the Gazette.com homepage. I hope today's conversation was worth your time. If you like it, tell a friend and subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you find your podcast. Send fan mail to podcast@thegazette.com. And you can find us on the homepages of the Quad City Times, Sioux City Journal, Muscatine Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Waterloo-Cedar Falls Courier, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Scarlet Runner will take us out. If you know an Iowa band or musician who should be on our show, send us a sound file and subscribe to On Iowa Politics on iTunes and Stitcher. For Amie, Todd, and our producer, Stephen, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening. Stay well.
Road is my religion. Some will be my guide in the outer atmosphere. I got nowhere left to hide. And I'll keep on growing till my fuel runs dry. And I'll keep on going till the day I die.